Armin always kept to himself, but not because he disliked people. He simply felt more comfortable around things that were broken. While other boys spent afternoons playing cricket in the streets or hanging out in groups, he preferred sitting on the old wooden stool in the small shed behind his house. There, in that quiet space, he found comfort in the soft hum of tools and the gentle clinking of metal pieces. Everything around him was worn out, dusty, or bent out of shape, but he treated each piece with care. His mother often said he had hands that could hear. If something was chipped, cracked, or simply forgotten by others, he somehow knew how to bring it back to life. It wasn't that he learned these skills from books or teachers. He just understood broken things, maybe because he had spent so much time with them. They felt familiar. They felt safe. One evening, as he searched through a pile of things left outside a neighbor's house, he found a guitar neck lying at the bottom. The strings were missing, the wood was chipped, and the tuning pegs were rusted. Still, he lifted it gently, as if it were something precious. Next to it was a small metal frame that looked like it belonged to an old machine. It was bent, but its shape felt interesting to him. He collected both pieces and took them back home. Over the next few days, he kept adding other discarded parts, a thin metal rod, a piece of wire, a hollow tin frame, and even a broken wooden panel. Slowly, something began to take shape. He wasn't building a guitar. He wasn't building a violin. He wasn't even sure what it was, but to him, it felt like an instrument waiting to be heard. His mother watched him from the doorway sometimes. She didn't interrupt him. She only smiled quietly, the way someone smiles when they know a secret that others might never understand. She remembered his father's words, spoken years ago before he passed away. Let him create. His heart speaks through his hands. By the time the school announced the annual music showcase, Armin had already spent weeks shaping his unusual instrument. It was rough around the edges. The wood didn't match. The metal didn't shine. It looked like something made from leftover pieces that no one else wanted. When he carried it to school for the first time, the reaction was immediate. A group of boys spotted him walking through the corridor. One of them nudged the other and pointed. "What is that thing?" Another asked loudly. "It looks like trash," someone whispered. But the whispers didn't end there. More students turned to look. Some tried to hide their laughter. Others didn't bother. Armin kept his eyes down and continued walking. He didn't want to argue or defend anything. He just wanted to play. Inside the music room, a few students were tuning their violins and guitars. Their instruments looked polished and expensive. When Armin placed his creation on the table, one girl glanced at it and raised her eyebrows. "Is that really what you're going to perform with?" she asked, not unkindly, but with clear disbelief. Armin simply nodded. "It works," he said softly. The music teacher, an older man with tired eyes, approached him and examined the strange instrument. He didn't laugh, but he didn't hide his confusion. "You made this yourself?" he asked. Armin nodded again. The teacher paused, then gave a slow nod. "If you believe it can play, then bring it on the day of the showcase. Music can come from the most unexpected places." Those words gave Armin a little warmth in his chest. It wasn't praise, but it was acceptance, something he rarely received. At home, he spent every evening practicing. The sound that came from the instrument was unlike anything he had heard before. It wasn't clean like a guitar or bright like a violin. It had a deep, warm tone, with a slight metallic echo that made every note feel full, almost emotional. When he played slowly, it sounded like something telling a story. When he played fast, it felt alive, almost breathing. He thought of his father often during those nights. His father had been the one who kept old tools and broken radios, always fixing things that others threw away. Armin used to sit beside him, watching quietly. His father would say, "Things don't lose their value just because they're damaged. They just need someone who sees what's still there." He never forgot those words. As the day of the music showcase got closer, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He wanted people to hear the instrument's voice. He wanted them to understand that broken things weren't useless. But he also feared the laughter that might come again. One afternoon, when he stayed after school to practice, two boys from his class walked into the empty hall. They noticed him sitting on the stage with his instrument. "There he is," one of them whispered loudly. They walked closer, pretending to be curious. "So, are you really going to play that thing in front of everyone?" the taller one asked. Armin didn't look up. "Yes, why?" the boy said with a smirk. "Don't you think people will laugh?" "They might," Armin said honestly. The boys exchanged glances. "It's your choice, I guess," one of them shrugged before walking away. When they left, Armin sat quietly for a moment. The hall was empty, the stage lights dim. He looked at his instrument, his fingers gently brushing over the strings he had stretched himself. The memory of his father's voice returned once more. When you create something with heart, don't fear judgment. People only understand the value of something after they truly hear it. He took a slow breath and began to play. The soft echo filled the hall. It drifted through the empty seats, across the wooden floor, and up to the ceiling. The sound wasn't perfect. A faint vibration came from the metal frame, and the wood sometimes gave a rough undertone. But all of it blended into something unique. That evening, as he walked home, the sky was a gentle shade of purple. The street felt quiet, and he carried his instrument close to him, as if it were something fragile. His mother was waiting by the gate. "Long practice?" she asked. "Yes," he replied with a small smile. She looked at the instrument, then at him. "You're ready," she said softly, as if she already knew. He hoped she was right. The night before the showcase, Armin couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the crowd, the bright lights, the laughter, and the whispers. He wondered if he was making a mistake. Maybe he should have stayed in the background, hidden behind everything like always. Maybe people were right. Maybe it was just junked out. But then he remembered the sound of the empty hall when he played. The way his mother looked at him. The way his teacher didn't question him further. The way he felt inside when the music flowed through his fingers. He wasn't performing to impress anyone. He wasn't performing to compete. He was performing because the music meant something to him. Because the instrument held pieces of his father's world. And because it carried a voice only he could shape. With that thought, he finally closed his eyes. The morning of the showcase arrived with a soft breeze. Students carried their polished instruments and neatly packed cases. They chatted happily, their voices filling the school courtyard. When Armin entered, carrying his unusual creation wrapped in a simple cloth, some heads turned, a few whispered again. But this time, he didn't lower his gaze. He walked straight toward the backstage area, holding the instrument carefully. The unfamiliar shape caught the light, revealing its rough edges and mismatched pieces. To many people, it still looked like junk. But to him, it was something entirely different, and soon, everyone would hear what he heard. The morning of the showcase felt heavier than usual for Armin. Even though the sun was out and the school ground buzzed with excitement, he felt a quiet weight in his chest. It wasn't fear exactly, but something close to it, a mix of hope and worry that made every breath feel a little tight. He held his instrument carefully, almost protectively, as he stepped through the hallway. Inside the school auditorium, students filled the seats while teachers walked around giving last-minute instructions. A bright banner hung across the front stage, announcing the event. Everything looked polished and grand. It made his instrument feel even more out of place. But he reminded himself why he was there. He wasn't performing to prove anything. He was performing because it meant something to him. Backstage, most of the performers were either tuning their instruments or practicing their vocals. Their instruments glowed under the stage lights: sleek guitars, shiny violins, clean keyboards. When Armin placed his own instrument on the small table, a few students nearby paused and stared. One boy whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Is that the same handmade thing I thought he was joking?" Another girl glanced at it and tried to hide her smile. "He really brought it," she said softly. Armin heard every word, but he didn't react. He sat down quietly, checking each string one more time. Some of them were slightly loose from the walk, so he tightened them with gentle turns. His hands moved slowly, but confidently. Every small part of the instrument held a memory, every nail, every screw, every wire. The teacher in charge walked by and stopped near him. He looked at the instrument again, then at Armin. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little," Armin admitted. "That's normal," the teacher said kindly. "Remember, the stage doesn't judge. People might, but the stage doesn't. It only carries your sound. Play what is true to you." Armin nodded, and the teacher moved on. Those words settled in his heart. "Play what is true to you." He repeated it to himself quietly. As the event began, the lights dimmed, and the audience clapped when the first performer entered. A girl with a bright red guitar played a cheerful piece that filled the hall with upbeat energy. The crowd applauded loudly. Then a boy performed a classical tune on the piano, his fingers dancing confidently over the keys. More claps, more cheers. Each performance made Armin's heartbeat a little faster. His name was the 10th on the list. He counted silently as each performer finished, each one bringing him closer to his turn. At one point, one of the boys who teased him earlier came backstage holding a small bottle of water. "Hey," the boy said casually. "You sure you're ready for this?" He nodded toward the instrument with a smirk. Armin didn't answer. He simply looked at the stage entrance, waiting for the announcer to call him. The boy shrugged and walked away, but not before whispering to his friend, "This will be funny." Armin lowered his eyes to the floor. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He just felt a quiet sadness that people were laughing before they even heard a single note. But he also knew his father used to say, "People laugh at things they don't understand. It's easier than being curious." Finally, the ninth performer finished, and the audience applauded once more. The announcer stepped forward, holding the microphone. "Next, we have a special performance," he said with a friendly tone. "A handmade instrument, crafted by the student himself." A soft wave of murmurs filled the hall. Armin stood up slowly. His legs felt light, almost shaky, but he took a steady breath. He lifted his instrument gently, holding it close. When he stepped toward the stage entrance, the bright lights hit his eyes, blurring things for a moment. He walked onto the stage. The room seemed to grow quieter as he took his place on the stool. He placed the instrument on his lap, adjusting it carefully. From the corner of his eye, he noticed some students leaning forward, waiting to giggle or whisper. Others simply looked curious, unsure of what to expect. A hush spread across the hall as he positioned his fingers on the strings. He could hear his own breathing, soft and uneven. He could hear the distant hum of the air conditioning. He could even hear someone whisper, "What is that thing?" from the second row. But he didn't look up. Instead, he closed his eyes. He remembered the sound of the empty hall during his practice the day before. The music had filled the space gently, like something alive. He remembered the way his mother said, "You're ready." He remembered his father's voice, always calm, always certain, and that was enough. He played the first note. It echoed through the hall, not too loud, not too sharp, but warm and full. A few whispers stopped immediately. Then he played the next note, and the next. Each one carried a gentle vibration that spread through the room like ripples on water. The audience leaned in, surprised. The strange instrument didn't sound broken or messy. It sounded emotional, almost like it was speaking. Some notes were smooth, others carried a soft tremble, but together they created something that no one had expected. Armin kept his eyes closed as his fingers moved with calm rhythm. He didn't rush. He let each sound breathe, let each note settle before moving to the next. The hall was silent. Not a single giggle, not a single whisper. Even teachers who had been busy looking at the schedule paused and turned their attention fully toward the stage. In the third row, a student who had laughed earlier lowered his smile slowly. He stared at the stage with a confused expression, as if trying to understand how something that looked like junk could produce such a meaningful sound. The melody began to deepen. Armin shifted the pressure of his fingers, creating a richer tone from the metal frame. The sound changed from soft to soulful, almost like a voice carrying both sadness and hope. It was a sound that made the room feel smaller, closer, like everyone was sharing the same heartbeat. Armin didn't see any of this. He didn't see the stillness that wrapped the audience. He didn't see the teacher wiping his eyes softly. He didn't see the boy who had mocked him now staring at the stage with wide eyes. He only felt the music. There was a moment when he almost forgot the crowd entirely. All he could think of was his father sitting beside him years ago, teaching him how to hold tools properly. He remembered the warm evenings spent fixing old radios together, the laughter they shared when something finally worked again. The notes he played felt like memories poured into sound. As he reached the middle of his performance, the hall grew even quieter. It was a strange kind of silence, not empty, not cold, but full. The kind of silence that meant people were listening deeply. He continued to play, letting the melody rise and fall gently. The final section was softer, almost like a whisper. His fingers slowed, and the sound thinned into a delicate hum. Then, with one last gentle sweep of his hand, the music stopped. The hall remained silent. Armin opened his eyes. The lights felt brighter now, and he blinked a few times. He looked at the audience. They were completely still. No laughter, no whispers, no movement, just stillness. For a brief moment, he wondered if something had gone wrong. But then he looked closely, really looked, and saw the expressions on their faces. Soft eyes, thoughtful gazes, quiet breaths. He didn't hear clapping yet, but their silence spoke louder than applause. Armin lowered his instrument gently onto his lap, feeling a strange calm wash over him. The moment held, stretching softly across the hall, and then, somewhere in the back row, someone took a deep breath that echoed lightly. The silence had turned into something else, something powerful, something no one had expected from the boy with the junk instrument. For a long moment, the hall stayed completely still. Armin sat there on the stage, his fingers resting lightly on the strings of his handmade instrument. Unsure of what the silence meant, he expected laughter, or maybe light applause just out of politeness. But instead he found himself sitting in a room that felt frozen in time. Even the air felt heavy, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then, one small sound broke the stillness. It wasn't a clap. It wasn't a whisper. It was the soft exhale of someone who had been moved more than they expected. And that single breath somehow carried through the room. Armin looked up slowly. He saw faces he recognized, students who had teased him, teachers who had doubted him, classmates who had never spoken to him before. But their expressions were different now. Their eyes were softer, their posture gentler, their attention fully on him. Finally, the first clap came. It was hesitant, almost shy. Then another joined it, and another. Within seconds, the hall burst into applause, louder and louder with every passing moment. Some students stood up, others wiped their eyes. A few looked surprised at themselves for reacting in such a way, as if they didn't expect to be touched by music made from something so unusual. Armin felt warmth rise in his chest. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply lowered his head in thanks. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from something close to relief. He had played from his heart, and the room had listened. The teacher in charge stepped forward with the microphone once the applause softened. "Thank you," he said to the audience. Then he turned to Armin. "That was remarkable." The crowd agreed with another wave of claps. Armin stood up carefully, holding his instrument close as he walked off the stage. Every step felt unreal. He had never imagined a moment like this. When he reached backstage, several students looked at him differently. A few smiled, others simply stared, unsure what to say. The same boy who had teased him earlier approached him slowly. "Hey," the boy muttered. That was actually good." He scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "I didn't expect that." Armin nodded politely. He didn't know what else to say. Another student, a girl from his class, took a small step forward. "It was beautiful," she said gently. "I've never heard anything like it." Her words were so simple, yet they held something honest, something sincere. Armin felt his throat tighten for a moment. He managed a soft, "Thank you." The teacher who had encouraged him earlier came backstage too. "You did well," he said with a proud smile. "Very well. You should be proud of yourself." Armin smiled softly. "I'm glad they listened." "They didn't just listen," the teacher said. "They felt it." Armin didn't know how to respond to that. He looked down at his instrument, the rough wood and mismatched pieces still visible under the backstage lights. It still looked like something built from scraps, something people would walk past without a second glance. Yet it had filled the hall with a sound that reached everyone for the rest of the showcase. Armin sat quietly backstage, watching the other performers. But something was different now. People didn't look at him with curiosity or amusement anymore. They looked at him with respect. Some nodded at him, others gave shy smiles. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, and part of him didn't know what to do with it. When the event ended, students gathered in groups, chatting excitedly about the performances. Armin packed his instrument carefully, wrapping it with the old cloth he always used. He was about to leave when a group of teachers approached him. One of them, an older teacher who rarely spoke, said softly, "You reminded us why music matters." Another added, "It came from the heart." That's what made it special. Their words stayed with him. On the way home, the sky was turning golden with the late afternoon light. The streets were busier than usual, filled with children playing and people returning from work. Armin walked quietly, his instrument held safely in his hands. He could still feel the vibration of the last note he played, as if it stayed alive within the strings. When he reached home, his mother opened the door before he even knocked. She must have been waiting. Her eyes searched his face, and when she saw his gentle smile, her own eyes softened. "It went well?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. "Better than I thought." She stepped forward and hugged him gently. "I knew it would." Inside the house, she made tea while he placed his instrument on the table. He sat beside it, tracing the rough edges with his fingers. His mother joined him and asked, "Did they understand it?" Armin nodded. "I think they did." His mother smiled proudly. "Your father would be so happy." He looked at her, then down at the instrument. "I felt like he was with me." That evening, Armin sat outside on the small bench in the yard. The sky was turning darker, sprinkled with early stars. The air smelled of fresh soil and distant cooking fires. He leaned back slightly, closing his eyes. He could hear faint sounds from houses nearby, laughter, conversations, a radio playing somewhere. But inside his mind, he heard the melody he had played earlier. He remembered the way the hall fell silent, the way the notes echoed gently through the crowd, the way the applause rose like a soft wave. He didn't expect any of it, yet it happened. And it wasn't because his instrument looked special or because he wanted attention. It happened because people heard something true. Later that night, he placed the instrument on his bedside table. He looked at it for a long time. It wasn't perfect. The wood was still chipped. The metal pieces were uneven. The strings needed tuning. But he didn't want to change any of it. Every flaw told a story. The next morning at school, something surprising happened. As soon as he walked through the gate, a few students waved at him. Others came up to him and said things like, "Your performance was amazing," or "I didn't know you could play like that." Their voices carried respect instead of mockery. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, and he didn't know how to react. He only nodded politely, giving small smiles. He didn't want to make a big deal out of it. During the break, the teacher in charge of the showcase called him to the music room. When Armin entered, the teacher was standing near the piano. "I have something to ask you," the teacher said. "Some of the staff suggested that we record your piece for the school's annual album. What do you think?" Armin blinked in surprise. "Record it? Yes, your music deserves to be heard again. And not everyone who wanted to attend could come yesterday. This will allow more people to hear what you created." Armin hesitated. The idea of recording something made him nervous, but the teacher's expression was earnest. "If you agree," the teacher continued, "we can set up a quiet session next week. No pressure, just you and your instrument." Armin looked at the floor for a moment, then back at the teacher. I'll try," he said. "That's enough," the teacher replied warmly. As Armin left the room, he felt a strange blend of excitement and uncertainty. He had never imagined anything like this would happen. He simply wanted to share his music once. But now, it seemed like the sound had reached further than he expected. During lunch, a group of students called him over to sit with them. They asked questions about his instrument, how he made it, how it worked, how long it took. Some looked curious, others genuinely impressed. For the first time, he felt included, but he remained quiet and humble. He didn't want the attention for himself. He only wanted people to understand the music. That night, when he reached home, he told his mother about the recording idea. She listened with wide eyes, smiling softly. "You should do it," she said. "Let more people hear what you created." He nodded slowly. "I will." Then she asked, "Are you scared?" "A little," he admitted. "That's good," she said gently. "Things that matter often make us nervous." Her words stayed with him the whole evening. Later, he sat in the shed behind the house, the same place where he had first built his instrument. The small wooden stool was still there. The tools were scattered just as he had left them weeks ago. He placed the instrument on his lap and began to play softly. The sound filled the small shed, warm and familiar. It wasn't a performance now. It wasn't for applause or approval. It was just him and the music, the way it had always been. As he played, he realized something important. The showcase had changed others, but it had changed him too. Not because he was suddenly popular or admired, but because he learned that even something built from broken pieces could touch someone's heart. And that meant he could too. He closed his eyes, letting the melody flow, simple and honest. The world outside continued as usual, cars passing, people talking, children laughing. But inside that small shed, Armin found something quiet and deep, a feeling that told him he was not invisible, he was heard. The hall was still humming softly from the way the crowd reacted to his playing the night before. People had gone home talking about it, some calling their friends, some replaying it in their minds like a scene they didn't want to let go of. But he didn't hear any of that. He had walked home quietly, his steps slow, his breathing a little shaky, still unsure if everything that happened was real or just something he imagined out of hope. That morning, he woke up before the sun, sitting on the small wooden chair by his window. Outside, the sky was pale, and the streets were empty. He didn't rush to get ready. Instead, he kept replaying the moment when the whole room fell silent. Not silent in a bad way, but in a way that said people were truly listening. He wasn't used to that. All his life, people brushed him off, telling him his old keyboard wasn't worth touching, that he should focus on something else, something practical. But for the first time, he felt something shift around him. He had to return to the hall later that day. The manager had asked him to come early, saying they needed to discuss something. He wasn't sure what that meant. Was he in trouble? Did he break a rule? Did someone complain? His mind kept spinning in all directions until he finally forced himself to stand, wash his face, and head out. On the walk to the hall, he passed people who usually never noticed him. But this time, a few nodded. One older man even stopped him. "You're the one from last night, right?" The man asked with a small smile. He nodded, unsure what to say. "That was something special. Haven't heard playing like that in a long time." The man patted his shoulder and walked on. For a moment, he stood frozen. Compliments weren't something he knew how to receive, but it warmed him anyway. He reached the hall just as a few staff members were starting their day. Some of them looked at him with curious eyes. Normally, they barely looked at him unless they needed him to carry something or clean something up. But now, they watched him like he was someone new. The manager called him into the office. The room was small, with papers stacked everywhere, and a faint smell of old coffee. "Sit down," the manager said. Not in his usual rushed voice, but in a calmer, more thoughtful tone. He sat, hands resting awkwardly on his knees. "Last night was unexpected," the manager continued. "You knew that, right?" He nodded again. "People loved it. A lot of them stayed back just to talk about you. Some even asked if you were a guest performer. And that got the board curious." The manager leaned back. "We've been thinking maybe we could have you perform again tonight. Not just as a moment in between tasks, but as part of the event, officially, on the program." His breath caught. "Me, but I was just messing around with the piano." "You weren't messing around," the manager said with a small smile. "You moved a room full of people. Not everyone can do that. We want to give you another stage." He didn't know what to say. He'd never been offered anything like that. The idea of performing again made his heart beat fast. Excitement mixed with fear. What if last night was just luck? What if he messed up this time? What if people realized he wasn't actually good? "You don't have to say yes," the manager added, noticing his hesitation. "But think about it. You deserve the chance." After the meeting, he walked out of the office slowly, almost in a daze. Staff members whispered when he passed by, not in a mocking way, but like people suddenly noticing the quietest person in the room. He spent the next few hours sweeping the stage, wiping down chairs, and helping prepare the hall for the next event. But his mind was somewhere else. Every time he looked at the piano, something inside him pulled. That instrument wasn't expensive, it wasn't polished, but somehow, last night it felt like it understood him better than any person ever had. At break time, he sat backstage, staring at his hands. His fingers weren't the elegant type, not the ones you'd expect from a skilled player. They were worn, with small cuts from lifting heavy boxes, rough from work. But when they touched the keys, something different happened, something he couldn't explain. As he sat there lost in thought, a soft voice came from behind him. "Are you really performing again tonight?" It was one of the younger staff members. She had always been kind to him, never rude, never dismissive. She stood there holding a tray, looking genuinely curious. "They asked me to," he said quietly. "I'm still thinking about it." "You should do it," she said without hesitation. "You were amazing. Everyone felt it. I felt it. It wasn't just music. It was like you were telling your story." That sentence stayed with him long after she left. He went back to work, but inside, he was arguing with himself. One moment he felt brave, the next terrified. Finally, he went to the hall when no one was watching and sat at the piano. He didn't touch the keys yet. He just sat there, breathing slowly. His thoughts drifted back to the small house where he grew up, to the tiny keyboard he saved up for when he was younger, the one people made fun of. They said it wasn't real music. They said it sounded like a toy, but it was all he had, and he loved it. That old keyboard taught him everything. It carried all his emotions when he had no one to talk to. He lifted his hands and played a short, soft tune, one he used to play late at night when life felt too heavy. The sound filled the empty room gently, rising and falling like quiet breaths. And for the first time that day, he felt calm. By afternoon, he returned to the manager's office and nodded. "I'll do it." The manager smiled widely, almost relieved. "Good choice. You won't regret it." From that moment on, the staff treated him differently. Not like he was just a helper, but like he was someone important for the night. Some even asked if he needed anything. One offered him water. Another asked if he wanted to warm up before the event began. But he didn't want to warm up. He wanted to save everything for the moment people walked into that hall again. As evening approached, the hall lights dimmed softly, and the crowd began trickling in. He watched from backstage, his nerves steady but alive. People were talking about him, he could hear it. They didn't know he was listening. Is he really performing? I heard he brought someone to tears last night. He looked so shy though. I can't believe that was him." He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He wasn't doing this to impress anyone. He wasn't doing this to prove someone wrong. He was doing it because last night, when the crowd fell silent, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: recognition. Not for being useful, or quiet, or hardworking, but for something that came from inside his heart. The lights dimmed further. The host took the stage, and then he heard it, the words that made his entire body feel weightless. "Tonight, we have a special performer, someone whose music touched us deeply yesterday. Please welcome." His name echoed across the hall. He stepped out slowly, the stage lights warming his face, his hands trembling just a little. People watched him with curiosity, but not the mocking kind he once feared. There was something softer in their eyes. He walked to the piano, sat down, and let his fingers rest gently on the keys. The room was silent, and he breathed in, letting the moment settle. This time, he wasn't scared. This time, he felt ready. And when he pressed the first note, everything changed again. He sat at the piano with the whole hall watching him. The lights were warm on his face, and the only sound he could hear was the softness of his own breathing. His hands hovered over the keys, shaky but ready. He knew this moment would stay with him for a long time, not because the room was full or because everyone was waiting for him, but because he finally felt like he belonged on that stage. He closed his eyes for just a second, letting the memory of his old keyboard come back to him: the worn-out keys, the uneven sound, the little cracks on the plastic. People used to laugh at that instrument, calling it junk, saying it wasn't real. They didn't know that every note from that keyboard helped him get through days when life felt too heavy. They didn't know it carried stories he never said out loud. Last night, when he played, those stories finally found a place to breathe. Now, tonight, he wanted to share even more. He pressed the first key, and the sound rose softly, like a whisper. The hall leaned in without meaning to. People who had been talking fell silent. Even those who didn't know music felt something shift around them. He didn't start with anything grand. He began with a simple tune, one he made up when he was young. A tune he played to feel less lonely. A tune that held moments of sadness, but also small flashes of hope. The melody floated gently through the hall, touching every corner dot as he played. The crowd watched him with eyes that slowly softened. They didn't see a worker anymore. They didn't see someone who cleaned the stage or stayed in the background. They saw someone who carried music in his bones. The tune grew fuller, smoother, guided by emotions he never dared to show before. His fingers moved with confidence he didn't know he had. The sound rose and fell like a story unfolding in front of everyone. A few people in the front row pressed their hands to their mouths, trying to hold back tears. Some let them fall quietly. The staff members backstage stood still, watching him with something close to pride. They had always known he was hardworking, but now they saw a whole different side of him, someone brave enough to share a piece of his soul. Halfway through the piece, he added a new melody, something he created that very afternoon while sitting alone with the piano. A melody that said, "I'm not invisible anymore." He didn't speak those words, but the music carried them clearly. The longer he played, the more he felt the fear melt away. In its place came something warm, something bright. He didn't think about the mistakes he might make. He didn't think about the people who once mocked him. He didn't think about the old jokes about his junk keyboard. All he felt was the music flowing from him to the room. The final note came gently, like a soft breath at the end of a long story. When the sound faded into silence, the room didn't react right away. He lifted his hands slowly, unsure of what to do next. Then he looked up. The entire hall was on its feet. People were clapping, not politely, but with full hearts. Some were wiping their eyes. Others looked stunned, as if they had just witnessed something they couldn't explain. He sat there frozen, overwhelmed. The applause grew louder, stronger. It echoed through the hall like a wave. The manager backstage clapped the hardest, smiling proudly. Even the people who mocked him the night before stood and clapped, their faces filled with disbelief and respect. He finally stood, bowing awkwardly. He wasn't used to people cheering for him. He didn't know how to react, but he felt something he had never felt before. Acceptance. As he walked off stage, people reached out to him, offering handshakes, pats on the shoulder, warm smiles. That was beautiful. You're gifted. Your music. It meant something. He could barely respond. His throat felt tight, his chest filled with emotions he didn't have words for. Backstage, the young staff member who had encouraged him earlier came running toward him, her eyes bright. "You did it," she said, almost breathless. "You really did it." He smiled softly, still overwhelmed. I just played what I felt. That's why it was perfect, she said. Then the manager approached with a serious expression at first. Though his eyes were warm, we'd like to offer you something, the manager said. Not just a one-time performance. We want you to play during special events from now on, officially. And we'd like to help you record your music too. People need to hear what you can do. He stared at the manager, unsure if he heard correctly. Record my music. Yes, the manager said. You have something rare, something real. We don't want it to stay hidden. His heart thumped loudly. He had never imagined something like this. Not for someone like him. The manager placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You earned this. Last night wasn't an accident. Tonight proved that. He nodded slowly, to move to speak later. When the crowd finally left and the hall grew quiet again, he sat alone on the stage. The lights were dim now, soft and warm. The piano sat in front of him, still carrying the emotion of the night. He touched one of the keys lightly. A small, gentle sound rang out. He smiled. He remembered all the days he sat with his old keyboard, the same keyboard people laughed at. They said it sounded strange. They said it wasn't worth learning on. But that keyboard had been his friend, his escape, his starting point. And now, here he was, not because of luck, not because someone gave him a shortcut, but because he never stopped playing, even when no one cared. He looked around the empty hall and whispered softly, "Thank you." He wasn't sure who he was thanking, maybe life, maybe the people who finally listened, maybe the younger version of himself who kept practicing in the dark. He packed up his things and stepped out of the hall. The night air was cool and calm. The city lights shimmered softly. He walked slowly, letting the quiet wrap around him. Even though the night was peaceful, he felt a spark inside him, a warm excitement about what might come next. People once mocked him. They laughed at his old instrument. They dismissed him without knowing anything about him. But now they listened, now they felt, now they understood. Not because he shouted or argued or tried to prove anything, but because he played, and his music spoke louder than words ever could. As he walked home, he realized something important. Sometimes the things others call junk hold the most beautiful stories. Sometimes the quietest person carries the strongest voice. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment of courage to change everything. He looked up at the sky, feeling lighter than ever before. This was just the beginning. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready for whatever came next.